And what we're doing is we've created this. I'm just calling it the Chiropractic Rainmakers, and it's really for go-getters who want to put their systems in place and go to a higher level, and really people who are more business-minded, to be honest with you, and want to take their business and revenue up to a significantly higher level. That's what this really is for. It's the Chiropractic Rainmakers. Now, what we're going to do is webinar is every Tuesday, or it's second Wednesday of the month. Second Wednesday of the month is this webinar. So that'll happen. But what also is going to happen is I'm looking to actually visit offices. So twice a year, we'd like to actually, within the group, go to an office and evaluate it and actually go into content too. And like on a Saturday, spend a full Saturday. So maybe fly in on a Friday night and make it like a 12-hour a day on Saturday from the morning, from like 9 to 9. And not only look at the office and evaluate the office and see how I would modify it, change it, or flow, just everything that's going on in an office, but also cover relevant content likewise. So it really is, this is more of a designed to be a proactive group, not passive group. And so having said that, and then it's the primary focus of the Chiropractic Rainmakers is again to know how to hire, know how to market, hire, and train associate doctors and manage them, as well as open multiple offices. So this is all about huge leverage. So what I'm going to do is just cover some real basic things this time, but and this is the first meeting, so people are just getting familiar with it. And then what I'm going to do is actually go into specific detail relative to the doctors that have associate doctors, or looking to hire associate doctors, or trying to manage associate doctors, or open, the next office. This is going to be designed for handling their issues. So it's not just going to be me up here talking. It's going to be actually dealing with the day-to-day issues that's going on in the field, so to speak. So we can help you escalate up and decrease problems and limitations and things like that. So having said that, let me just touch on a few key points, and I've said this many times before. Let me just point out the purpose of the associate doctor. First of all, we have, a lot of times when you go to chiropractic college, that's not the mentality. The mentality is not, I'm going to have multiple associate doctors and I'm going to open offices. That is not the normal mentality. That's not mainstream. So what happens is we get stuck. We get stuck in a certain mind frame, a certain paradigm suggesting that, we just, the maximum of what we're doing is just to go in and practice and then try to do as well as you can in practice. And of course, I'm here to tell you that that's the lowest level. So the highest level, which most people aspire to, is actually the lowest and worst way to make money. So the worst way to make money is exchanging time for money. That's you being in your office. Now, the good and bad news about that, the good news is you have to learn systems. I don't know anybody that doesn't know the basics of running the core components of a business. And remember, there's essentially four categories of profitability, but there's 7 categories to running a business. And I don't know of anybody that does not have that knowledge and skill level that knows how to go to their first or second associate doctor, or to their second or third office, because it's like a pyramid. So if you're not good in your office, there's like a 99.9% chance you're not going to be able to open a second office that's very much more successful than that. So the bad news about exchanging time for money is you have to learn. You have to have the knowledge and the skill set. And, I found in chiropractic that there's, a few main categories. But if you look at running a business, And that's what when you're a chiropractic rainmaker, that's really what we're talking about is being a business owner, not a chiropractor. And when you look at running a business, the categories that make up running a business are, and this is right out of the E-Myth. It's an excellent book if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's one of the top 10 best-selling business books of all time. And it came out, probably 30 years ago now. But the E-Myth, the original E-Myth, or even the updated one is the one to read. And then he did break-off versions, the E-Myth for doctors or physicians and things like that. And those were just nowhere near as good. So the original E-Myth, or the updated E-Myth, is the book to read. But basically, the real simple concept is, and it makes a ton of sense, is there's about 7 categories to running a business. And so you've got the CEO, somebody who's the leader, who's going to make the decisions, decide where to go, things like that. So let's see here. You got the CEO. You've got the CEO. So you got HR. Somebody's got to do the hiring, training, things like that. And then you're going to have the marketing, how to get business. You're going to have quality control, service. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, the financial department. And here's what really drove this home when I read this. This is the biggest concept of that book and running a business, which is number 7, which is the technical component. And this is where everybody messes up. They think that if you just know the technical component, and the technical component, if you're a chiropractor, is being a chiropractor. Doing examinations, treatments, things like that. That's the technical component. If you're a dentist, it's filling teeth, pulling teeth, okay? And so when we go to school to be chiropractors, or in some of these specialty fields, or when you go into business to be self-employed, even if you're a cabinet maker, chances are you enjoy and like the technical component. That's why you did it. You didn't do it because you wanted to be a CEO per se, or that you wanted to deal with HR, or that you wanted to deal with marketing. You know, if that was really your primary focus, you probably would have went to business school. And the point that he makes is there's 7 categories to running a business. And the reason most businesses fail and don't do well is they're good at the technical component, and they never learn the other categories of running a business. And so what are the other categories of running a business? Well, there's 4 profit centers in a business, 4. There's the new business, and that's under the category of marketing. And then there's retaining business in chiropractic, that's called patient retention. Every business wants to keep their customers after they make the original purchase. They want them to keep coming back. So that's the second category. And all of these have very unique strategies and knowledge to increase each one of them, the categories individually. And then you have the fees, and there are very specific kinds of fees. I call them horizontal and vertical fee structures, where you want to obviously maximize your exchange of time for money. And there's very specific rules and laws and, you know, how to do that. It's not, you don't just wing it. And then the 4th category is overhead. And the more you control your overhead, the higher your profitability. So the more knowledge and skill you have in each of those 4 categories, each of them is a profit area. So if you maximize each of those areas in profitability, all 4 of them, now that's how you maximize the profitability of a business. And most business owners and chiropractors don't think like that. Chiropractors are like a very one-track mind. It's like new patients, new patients, new patients. It's all that the chiropractor ever thinks about. He typically hardly ever looks at patient retention, hardly ever looks at the fee, how to maximize the fee structure, and very rarely, if ever, looks at his overhead. I mean, like never. It's amazing. It's very singular in focus, and then they're typically not even very good. And then not only that, then they don't even pay attention to the other 6 categories of running a business. In other words, when we look at the 4 categories of running a business, none of them have to do with the technical component. None of them. Getting business, that's marketing. Patient retention, that's marketing. That doesn't have anything to do with the technical component. Let me be real clear about this. When people have a perceived need to buy a product or service, and in chiropractic, there's 5 places that they will go. There's 5. The very first place everybody always wants to go first is a trusted source, a referral. Number 2 in chiropractic is location. That's 75%. By the way, that's not just chiropractic. That's brick and mortar. Dentist, it's the same thing. In places you actually have to physically go to. Location is paramount. And then after location is price. That's about 15%. Location is about 75%. And then the 4th category is service. Service factors only represent 3% of why people will pick a product or service. And quality only represents 3%. So what's my point? My point is chiropractors put all their emphasis in the technical component of running a business. Technical meaning the chiropractic side. And they put all their emphasis on being a better chiropractor. Now, of the 7 categories of running a business, how many of them are responsible for the 4 categories of profitability? Remember, there's 4 categories of profitability. New business, patient retention, your fees structure, and your overhead. Well, new business is marketing. It's not a technical component. Patient retention is marketing. It's not a technical component. Fees is a financial component. Overhead is a financial category. So you have 2 marketing categories and 2 financial categories that basically affect the profitability of a business, not the technical component. And so here's what happens. Chiropractors think that they're going to get all this business from the technical side, and they don't. When people do pick because of the technical side in chiropractic, when they do, it's only 3%. So you have 8% of the population, so there's only 8% of the population looking for chiropractors. And out of that 8%, only 3% of them will pick based on the number one factor that chiropractors put the most attention on. And that's why, these are some of the main reasons why things go really bad for most chiropractors. And they don't do very well. So, you got to remember, there was the average visit came out in chiropractic economics is about 107 visits a week. A few years ago, the average income for chiropractors came out at $87,000. $87,000. Well, there's plenty of other jobs you can take and make more than $87,000. So, and then you got to remember the 80-20 rule. In every industry, there's always a real small percent of people in that industry that know the industry well and make a killing. Well, that was me. I'm a 3%er. So 3% of people in any industry make the vast majority and the big money in that industry. In other words, all attorneys don't make big money. All realtors don't make big money. All dentists don't. It's the 3%, the real go-getters at the top. And that's what I am. I'm a 3%er. I'm actually more than that. I opened 77 offices in 20 states. I'm the largest chiropractic provider in the world. And then there's the 17% that do above average. And then there's the 80% that do average to below average and even fail. So the masses of people don't do well in every industry. That's not how it works. So the point is the chiropractors, and again, this is true of professionals. If you're an accountant, you're a dentist, optometrist, ophthalmologist, this is what happens. And so chiropractors put all this focus on the technical component. None of the 4 categories of profitability are based on the technical component. Now, you'll lose business if you're a bad clinician. You'll definitely lose business. And when people do pick, the percentage of people that do pick based on the technical side meaning the quality side. The quality, in other words, you got, You got your DACBN, DACBO, certified sports physician, that kind of stuff that chiropractors pay so much attention to. They think they're going to get so much more business because of that, and you don't. Only 3% of the people pick. And then you got to remember, it's only 3% of 8%. So it's a very small number, and it's confined by a geographic radius of draw. And then you also have the other competitors within that geographic radius of draw. So it's a ridiculously small number. And that's also why you should never use that for marketing purposes. So, having said that, it's the other 4 categories. But those are the categories that are not taught. And so those are the categories that have to be learned. In addition to that, I personally have found that management gets to be a huge problem. Management. Matter of fact, I've identified seven areas, 7 categories. When I evaluate practices to see how well they're doing or not doing, it's overwhelmingly in one of these 7 categories. Number 1, and it's not in this order, by the way, but these are the 7 categories that overwhelmingly will determine your success. Number 1 is space. Well, chiropractors typically don't have a space problem. The problem they typically have with space is they buy too much. That's a very common problem. And it's the number 1 reason for high overhead. And then they have bad utilization of space. They got bad flow. They have bad patient flow, bad layout. Those are the 2 biggest problems I've seen in space. But that's typically not the problem that inhibits a chiropractor. Number 2 is labor. Chiropractors typically overhire. Very few chiropractors, won't hire enough staff, but most chiropractors hire too much staff relative to their productivity. I mean, I'll have chiropractors seeing 60 visits a week or 80 visits a week, and they got 2 full-time employees and even a part-time employee. And that's absolutely ridiculous. That's called terrible management is what that is. So, space, labor. Next one's equipment. That's typically never a problem. That limits a chiropractor. Equipment. We don't even need a lot of equipment as chiropractors, and we don't even need expensive equipment. So that's why that's very rarely, if ever, a limiting factor. So you got space, labor, equipment, and then the next category is motivation. And what happens when chiropractors start making decent money, and I've usually found that it's around $80,000. Once they start making $80,000 or more, the motivation goes to hell because they go out of survival and out of security. And that's the true motivating factors of human beings, unless you have something very, very unique, and that's called internal drive. And I've identified less than 20% of the population has that. So that's why so many chiropractors bottom out. They'll hit their 60 visits a week, 70, 80 visits a week. They'll make $80,000 or a little more, and the motivation basically is gone. Those are some of the hardest chiropractors to train. And it's not because of knowledge or skill, space, labor, equipment, it's because of motivation. Now, there's definitely ways of dealing with that and handling that. Matter of fact, all 7 of these categories, I deal with. So you got space, labor, equipment, motivation. And then there's the next biggest problem that I've identified is management. Chiropractors are terrible at management. Now, at low numbers, you can be bad at a lot of things when you're moving very slow. So you can have a very good example I use is a car. A car can have a lot of problems, and you will not even notice them when it's going, 3 miles an hour. And then try to take it up to, 100 miles an hour, and you'll notice a lot. And that's what happens with a lot of chiropractors. They don't notice their problems because they're moving at such a slow speed. Slow speed, like seeing 40 visits a week, 60 visits a week, 80 visits a week. Those are unbelievably slow speeds. And typically you won't even see problems when you're down around that area. So the problems meaning inhibiting factors. Then the next thing, so you got space, labor, equipment, motivation, and then we talked about management being big. But most of the time, the problem I see with management is not guys that are not guys that are doing well. It's the guys that are doing below average. It's typically not a problem for that guy because, again, you're not seeing enough business, so you don't have to have your team in place moving with great fluid motion. In other words, teamwork, systems and teamwork. So you don't have to have that very much when you're seeing 60 visits a week. You can have the front desk girl run to the back, run to the front, run to the back, answer the phone, put on a hot pack, take off. In other words, you can do crap, the same kind of stuff you never would be able to do at a higher level. But you won't even know it at low levels. That's kind of a classic example that I see. So the next one, after you got space, labor, equipment, we talked about motivation. We talked about the management category that I see the problems in is what I call personality-based offices. So these guys typically they're more driven. They're definitely more driven people. So they'll have successful practices. They'll see 150, 200 visits a week, 250, even 300 by themselves. But the problem, the very limiting factor now is they've never learned management or systems. And typically these doctors don't have good systems. And remember, if you don't have a system, it's not reproducible. You can't reproduce personalities. So if you don't have a system, meaning you do this first, this second, this third, you can't train it, and it's not reproducible. So, and you can't quantify it and see how well it's doing or not doing, and then identify where the problem's at. Well, you can do that with systems. So what happens typically is these doctors get up to, 150, 200 visits a week, and they max out. That's it. And because they never learn management, they never learn systems and management. And that's what you have to do to leverage up past your personality. Every now and then I'll run into chiropractors like that. That's not the majority. That's definitely the minority. But it becomes their limiting factor, is they don't have the systems and they don't have the management or the knowledge and training. And now it's just it's them and their personality pushing everything. And that really wears you out. That's actually the number one burnout factor right there, is when you have bad systems, bad leverage, bad management, you're doing everything. That's when there's huge burnout factor. So you can do well for a few years or whatever, but that's unbelievable burnout down the road. So that's space, labor, equipment, motivation, management, and then the last two is knowledge. A lot of chiropractors don't have the knowledge in marketing. They don't know the S-curve of economics, and that's the only marketing that attracts the 92% that's not seeking chiropractic care. So if you don't learn and you're not good at the S-curve of economics, you never learn educational sales, you're stuck fighting with the 8%. That's a huge problem in chiropractic. And then if you don't have the knowledge of all these categories, if you don't have the knowledge in patient retention, if you don't have the knowledge in the 5 types of overhead, if you don't have the knowledge in what's called horizontal and vertical fee structure to maximize your exchange of time for money, and then how to leverage your time and money. And then if you don't have the knowledge on how to be a manager, how to be a CEO, that's typically when you're back to the personality-driven practices. And you don't have the knowledge, in other words, of these core 7 categories of running a business. You don't have the knowledge of being a CEO, the basics of HR, human resources, in other words, how to hire properly for the right positions and train for the positions and hold accountable for the positions. That's a very common problem. And we already talked about the marketing. Quality control, we pay somewhat of attention to that. Remember, you'll lose business because of quality. It typically will not get you business. Only 3% of the 8% are basing their choice on picking a chiropractor based on quality. And then service factors, and I've seen some ungodly bad service factors. And so a lot of chiropractors are terrible at training in service factors. And again, that's part of just being a manager. Service factors. They're actually just taken for granted. People just think that, that whoever they hire is going to know basic service factors, and it just, a lot of negative stuff happens. And then the financial component, which is, the billing and the collections of the office. A lot of chiropractors will pay a little bit more attention to that. Probably the two categories chiropractors pay attention to or try to is new patients, new patients, new patients, and how do I bill them? Those are probably the two categories chiropractors get overwhelmed with. And then the last category is the technical component. And typically we don't have to pay too much attention to that. And remember, that's not why they're going to come see you anyway. So that's the knowledge category that you have to know. So as a self-employed person, you have to know all 7 of those categories. And then the 4 major categories of of profitability, marketing, patient retention, fees, and overhead, and especially management. That's what it takes to run a business. And so many chiropractors only think it takes being a good chiropractor. And that's why so many people don't do well. So so that's called the knowledge part. So remember, I'm identifying the 7 categories that I've seen that create limiting businesses. So we already talked about space, labor, equipment, motivation, management. We talked about knowledge in these 7 categories. And then the last one, which is huge, is not just knowledge, it's the ability. See, there's a huge difference between knowing about something and having the ability to do it. And that is where training comes in. It's either experience or training, and most people get knocked out of the game. So having the actual ability to be a leader CFO, to have the actual ability, not just know about who to hire, how to hire, where to hire, roles and responsibilities, and how to manage. It's actually having the ability to do it. And there's a huge difference between knowledge and ability. And people think they're one and the same, and they are not. I see over and over so many times clients come in and they learn a lot, but they never apply it. So the last category of the 7 categories I've identified that overwhelmingly become the limiting factors. And by the way, once you have that knowledge and skill, that's when it's unlimited. That's how I was able to open 77 offices in 20 states, because I was a CEO. I knew how to make decisions. I knew all these categories. I knew human resources. I learned it. I knew marketing. I learned it. I knew quality control. I learned it. I knew service factors. I learned it. Not only did I learn it, I knew how to apply it. I knew the basics of the financial categories. And then, of course, the chiropractic part was easy. That's the absolute easiest part there is of running a business. The technical part is unbelievably easy, but that's where everybody puts all their focus. And it's wrong. That is not what grows a business or grows profitability. There are plenty of good quality business people, whether it's a cabinet maker, an artist, a dentist, a chiropractor. I know a lot of chiropractors that are very good clinically, and they are terrible. They don't do well at all financially. One of the categories that I get a lot of DACBO and DACBN, the neurology guy and orthopedist. I get a lot of them guys contacting me on how to market because they thought that was going to get them business, and it didn't. So those are the 7. So in the big picture, again, what we're talking about is there's 7 categories to running the business. That's the CFO category. And remember, all of these categories already have rules and systems involved. It's not wing it. So there's the CFO category, number 1. Number 2 is the human resources, knowing how to hire, train, manage, put in place staff members. There's the marketing, most important marketing. Marketing has to do with 2 of the 4 major profitability centers, new business and patient retention. Then there's the quality control center. Then there's the service factor center, and you'll essentially lose business in those categories. And there's some unbelievable, obvious things that chiropractors do wrong all the time in those categories. And patients will never tell you. You'll never learn when it's a quality issue or a service factor issue. They don't have the confrontation to tell you. They just don't show up. Then there's the financial category. You have to learn that. And then, of course, the technical, just staying up with being a good chiropractor. Most chiropractors are pretty good at being chiropractors. That's what they went to school for. That's where their love is at, and their attention, and their focus. Unfortunately, that's not one of the 4 categories of profitability. So then you have the 4 categories of profitability, from new patients, patient retention, to fees to overhead. All of those are very specific systems. And then how well you put those together, and I found that there's basically seven major categories that'll determine your growth, your profitability, your ease, and again, that's space, labor, equipment, motivation, management, knowledge, and ability. Those are the 7 factors. Every time I evaluate a practice, we'll do a statistical analysis first. I'll look at the 4 main categories of profitability to see exactly where the problems are, to attack those first. And then when we go into those, I'll go through the checklist of all 7 of those factors to see which one of those 7 factors is inhibiting one of the profitability centers. Then I'll know how to put it in. I'll have the knowledge to put it in, but I'll not only have the knowledge to put it in, I have the ability to train it, to put it through 4 steps of training. So that's how we can change that system immediately. And that's how you can just replicate. That's why it's no big deal for me to open an office. That's why I would say the easiest office I ever opened was the 77th office. The hardest one was the first one. Because the more you learn to do this, it's just rinse and repeat. It doesn't take anything from me. I mean, so much of this that I'm covering now is unconscious incompetence because of the time, effort, and energy that I put into it. And so it's unbelievably easy. And that's why I would open, I had 2 full-time associate doctors. We'd see 350 visits a week. I only had 4 full-time employees, only 4. I was only in 1,700 square feet. And I had 7 doctors. In addition to everything I just said, I had 7 doctors I was training. And every 6 months, we opened their offices. So every 6 months, I opened 7 offices, every 6 months, while I had 2 full-time associate doctors, seeing 3 to 450 visits a week, with only 4 full-time employees. That's because we knew these systems. We knew exactly where to look, where to identify issues, where our strengths were, where our weaknesses were. It wasn't just try something. It wasn't just randomly try something, just wing it. That works. That overwhelmingly doesn't work. And so, in summary, those are the categories of running a business. And everybody's at a different level. You know, every client's at a different level in their knowledge and their ability and their skill. And that's one of the first things I do is I try to identify where are you at in all these categories. And then depending on where you're at is where we start. But the obvious goal is to take the clients from doing the analysis of the 4 profitability centers and trying to plug those holes as fast as I can. Trying to get their patient retention straightened up as fast as I can. Get the marketing to where they can access not only the 8%, but the 92% at will. Once you do that, you're going to start running into management problems because now you start having too many people come through. You also run into skill problems. It's a big problem when you're only used to seeing 60 visits a week, and then within 90 days you're seeing 150. You can't do the same thing with staff members, with the number of staff members, with what they do as staff members, with what you do in an individual visit. It's nowhere. It doesn't look like anything the same. And doctors seeing 60 visits a week don't understand that. They think that everything can stay exactly the same. I just need more new patients to see 150. And that is absolutely wrong. They can't see it. Because there's so many other things that will inhibit it. And bring it, even if you got a busload of new patients, it will just bring it right back down. You have management issues, flow issues, timing issues, knowledge, skill issues. And so that's why you have to identify the weakest link. You always have to identify the weakest link, because the weakest link in all of these systems I'm talking about is what limits you. And if you're always focusing and paying attention to the weakest link to clean it up, to train it and put it into a system, everything keeps, and it has to be a system or it comes back down. You just clean it up and there's not a system there, it'll just come back down. But every time you identify the weakest link in all of these categories, so I'm going to look at each of these 7 categories of running a business. I'm going to look at the 4 categories of profitability. And then I'm also going to look at the most common 7 categories of restricting business growth. And that's what I'm going to do a laser focus on. So where's the weakest link? Because that's how we can make the fastest dramatic change the quickest. And obviously we go from patient retention to new patient. That typically takes us to more patients than we physically can handle. Now we run into motivation problems typically. We'll definitely run into management problems. Then I got to teach the doctors how to be managers because they're not used to leveraging systems. So they have to learn management systems, Every now and then I'll run into a space issue, and it's usually not volume of space, it's the flow and the layout. It's patient flow and layout as the business grows. As an example, I had to change my layout 3 separate times. I was in 1,700 square feet, and I changed it. I totally changed it, the layout and flow, 3 separate times to increase my ability to see that kind of business each time because it became a limiting factor. So it wasn't knowledge or equipment. In other words, I didn't just go and get more space down the road, and that's what most chiropractors do. They think, oh, I just need more space. I'm like, no. It's efficiency of your existing spaces, almost always the space problem. So that's how we would run through, identify the weakest link, and then, of course, when we clean up the patient retention, clean up the marketing, you start running into motivation management problems. If we can overcome the motivation, we go right in and clean up the management problems, then we start leveraging. Then we learn how to hire and train not just staff, but associate doctors. And then we have to learn how to train. So now we'll have the profitability, and then at this time also is when we start paying attention to maximize your exchange of time for money, or your money for time. Now we'll pay a lot more attention to more profitable cases, okay? And because that's the flow. The first thing you have to learn is how to exchange time for money and maximize that. Number 2 is how to maximize your money per unit of time. Number 3 is how to leverage your time. Number 4 is how to leverage your money. And remember, only 1% of the population becomes millionaires exchanging time for money. 14% become millionaires leveraging money. 85% become millionaires leveraging time. So it's knowing how to leverage time is the greatest asset you'll ever do. And how to do that is not only knowing the 4 profitability centers, but how to manage them. That's leverage of time. Management is leverage of time, is what that is. It allows you to see more, do more at higher profitability. And those are all formulas. And you just got to learn them, and they change. They change. Most doctors don't even realize that. Again, they think they can just do what they're going to do, yet, double the number of visits. I'm like, nope, it's not going to happen. So those are the 7 factors. Those are the 4 categories that determine that are the profit centers. Those are the 7 categories that we evaluate and bring you through. And once you know how to do that, you know how to get business, keep it, you have the knowledge and skill, the 5 categories of overhead, so you got nice profitability, you know how to maximize your money per unit of time, you know how to maximize your time for exchange of time for money, way more than you physically can handle. We go into leveraging our time through employees and associate doctors. And then we have to learn the basics of management, all while keeping up the quality components, the service components. And then hopefully we're leveraging off. You learn the basics of the financial components from billing, collections, things like that, and the basics of accounting principles. But will those get leveraged off also to bookkeepers and account to employees for billing and collection, for bookkeepers and accountants. It's all back to leverage of time and money, leverage of time and money. And that's, once you do that, now you have all the skills just to reproduce it. And then that's all you do, is you just reproduce it. And that's why it was so easy to go from office to office to office, So I started with 2 offices, did 3, did 4. And then once those systems were down, by the time I was doing 3 offices at a time, I knew all the systems. And that's why I could easily ramp it up to 7. And within 3 months, they knew the basics of getting as many new patients as they wanted to and keeping them within 3 months. The last 3 months, we taught them essentially administrative factors, how to manage billing, coding, all that other stuff. So that's what happens, and then 6 months later, that's how we were able to open our office and then shoot right into profitability. Typically, between 6 and 12 weeks, they'd hit 100 visits a week. Well, that's the national average, 107 visits a week. So I'm putting out guys within 4 to 6 weeks that are running into the national averages. And now it's up to them, how much they want to do based on their motivation, how much they want to do. So that's the core components, 7 components of a business, 4 of profitability, and then the 7 factors that we'll look at that will be the highest probability limiting factor.